Please open your Bibles to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 9. Allow me to begin by expressing my gratitude and thanks for the invitation to be here today. I want to thank Jared, I want to thank Preston, I want to thank the elders, and I want to thank you for being here as well. Well, it's certainly true that I'm thankful to be here today. In a way, it feels odd saying that, because if I had my way, I probably wouldn't be here right now. As Jared mentioned just a moment ago, I'm from Mount Vernon, Ohio, not Mount Vernon, Texas. And trust me, there's a bit of difference between the two. Growing up as a little boy in Ohio, I always wanted to preach. And so as I thought about my future, I made plans about where I would go to school, about what would happen while I was at school, about where I would begin to work in my professional career following school, and I had it all mapped out. In my mind, I knew how all the dominoes were going to fall. It was merely my responsibility to show up, and everything would go according to the script that I had designed. Can I let you in on a little secret? It didn't work out that way. Not at all. Not everything that I hoped happened would. Many of the doors that I planned to find hanging wide open to me to walk through were slammed in my face. Wherever I had planned for my life to go left, circumstances, many of my own making, caused me to go right. And the easy path that I had planned out for myself, in many places and in many ways, turned into a long, windy, rocky road. And it took me in directions I did not plan to go. And yet, God, in His grace and in His providence, though my plan did not work out the way I had hoped, God has been so good to me. He has been good to me in more ways than I can count, and in ways greater than I could have ever hoped or imagined. And now I look at my life the way that it is, and I think, I don't want anything else. When I think about my wife, when I think about my house, when I think about the car that I drive, the fact that I'm privileged to work with the Brown Trail congregation, the fact that I'm privileged to work with the school, to enjoy all of these abundant blessings in life and more, the life that I thought I wanted isn't really for me. This life is the one that I wanted, though my plans did not come to fruition. And so yes, the doors that I wanted to open didn't. But other doors have. And though my life has not worked out the way in which I had planned it, I can't help but imagine my life going any other way. Now, I'm thankful for the doors that were closed to me. I'm thankful for the plans that went awry. I'm thankful for that hard and rocky road because it has brought me to where I am today. And I'm thankful for this life. While it's easier to see the silver lining in life when you're looking in the rearview mirror, when we're living in those moments of hurt, disappointment, and loss, it's not easy at all. For example, if you paid attention to the introduction that Jared gave for me just a moment ago, you'll notice that Jared said nothing about children. When my wife and I married 9 years ago, we planned to have children. And so we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and nothing. Then we got the doctors involved, and we prayed, and we waited, and we prayed some more, and still nothing. Just heartbreak and disappointment. My wife and I have now accepted the fact that children will not be in our future. And man, that hurts to say. And yet, that's not the way we planned it. But we have no doubt that God is seeking out the best in our lives. And we understand that the struggles that we have faced in our lives are no different than the struggles that you have experienced in your own. Maybe not the same kind of struggles and disappointments, but you've been there too. And so when it comes to experiencing the pain of watching our plans fall apart right before our eyes, we've all been there. We've all experienced it. And it's true that either you have experienced it, or maybe you're living in the midst of it now, or you will face it sometime in the near future. And so it's really true. Watching your plans go awry hurts. I think we all, like Job, would say, as he did in Job 17 and verse 1, my days are past, my purposes or plans are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. When Job was a young man, planning out his future, do you think Job ever anticipated the things that would befall him in the book named after him? Do you think it was all part of Job's plan to lose 10 children in a day? Do you think it was part of Job's master plan, his grand scheme in life, to watch his possessions be taken away in a day? Or for his body to be ravaged with sores and boils from the head of his foot, from his head to his foot? Well, of course not. And the same is true for us. We make our plans hoping that they'll all work out in a positive way. And yet we know that's not what often happens. Now, before we jump into our message, I want to give you a roadmap of where we're going to go over the next few minutes. In this lesson, I want to start with the big picture, talking about our plans, and then we'll narrow down and get into the specifics about what do we do when our plans fail. At the outset of our message, I invited you to Proverbs chapter 16, and so turn your attention there with me for just a moment. The text I want to set before you as we begin is Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 9. In Proverbs 16 and verse 9, the wise man writes the following: a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. My ultimate goal this afternoon, is to help you see how your plans intersect with trusting in God. We all understand that we're supposed to trust in God as we go through life, but we all, to one degree or another, also engage in some manner of planning. And so the question is this: how do these two things intersect? How do I trust in God while making plans for my life and living with the knowledge that those plans will not always go my way? Now, there's one more thing I want to do before we dive headlong into our passage. I first want to quickly define what we mean when we talk about planning. Here's my definition. Planning occurs when we use our minds to develop a proposed course of action that we believe will achieve a desired result. Planning is a mental activity. It's when you use your mind to chart out a course of action for the future, with the hope or desire that the path you've chosen to take will deliver to you everything that you hope it will. In other words, planning is a rational activity by which you take the future into account and you plan accordingly. And this thing we call planning, it's a natural part of life. We all do it. From the major life events to small daily things, we plan for it all. Question: how many of you have a day planner? Maybe it's somewhere on your phone. That's a plan. How many of you are looking to retire in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And so you're thinking about your budget. You're thinking about savings. You're setting forth a plan so that when that golden age comes, you'll be able to stop working and to be able to enjoy your retirement. How many of you are planning to go on vacation somewhere this year? Maybe you know where you're going, but you're not sure how you'll get there, or once you do, what you'll do when you arrive. You're still developing your plan. And even in the spiritual realm, we plan as well. This weekend's workshop would not have happened. It would not be a success if people were not making adequate plans. Song leaders plan the song service. Preachers plan their preaching. Elders make plans for the congregation, and deacons help facilitate and carry out those plans. Or what about in your own life? I know we're in the month of February, but how many of you started a Bible reading plan on January 1? I hope you're still true to it. I hope you're still going with it. We all make plans. The fact of the matter is, we make plans. And so as we begin this afternoon, I want to encourage you to make plans. In the first place this afternoon, as Christians, I want you to know we should certainly plan. Now, when I say that we should plan, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, duh. Of course we should plan. But I think this needs to be said. You see, there are many people who believe that any kind of planning at all is inconsistent with trusting in God. And so they'll quote Jesus in Matthew 6:34, and they'll say that we shouldn't think about tomorrow, but we should only focus on today. Well, that's an abuse of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 6 and verse 34, Jesus was not condemning planning, he was condemning anxiety, and there is a difference. But rather, the Bible, in no uncertain terms, encourages us to make plans. Let me give you just a few verses. While you're here in the book of Proverbs, go with me to chapter 6 for just a moment. Proverbs chapter 6. In Proverbs chapter 6, in verses 6 through 8, Solomon says to his son the following: "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and bringeth her food in the harvest." In preparing his son for life, Solomon says to him, go and look at what the ant does. The ant is self-motivated. The ant is industrious. And the ant makes provisions. It plans for the future. In short, if the ant knows how to plan, then certainly does a wise man too. What about Proverbs 21? Go there with me. Proverbs chapter 21. Proverbs 21 and verse 5 reads as follows. Proverbs 21 and verse 5 says, "The thoughts," or some translations say, "the plans of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of everyone that is hasty, only to want." Diligent planning, the book of Proverbs says, will bring about plenty in our lives, while hasty, short-sighted, live-for-the-moment thinking will leave us in poverty. And so there's value in planning. And we can see this to be true just in the world around us, even outside of the pages of Holy Writ. So, for example, take two men. Give them the same job with the same pay and the same expenses. Now take the first man. He lives an ordered life. And through careful planning, he is able to save and invest $200 a month. The second man is living fast and loose with his money. And he goes in debt $1,000 a month, living the kind of life he would enjoy. If you fast forward 10 years, tell me, who do you want to be? You know the answer to that. We see the value then of being wise in our planning, not living foolishly, not making haphazard judgments, but rather having a plan and sticking to it. But more than financial planning, what about the value of spiritual planning? Yes, godly persons not only plan for the here and the now, but godly people also plan for the there and the then. The wise and the godly man has a plan, not just for the rest of his days, but he plans for when his days on earth are through. Think about 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10. There the Apostle Paul would tell us, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad." Knowing that to be true, friend, you'd better have a plan. It would be the height of folly to know that a great and terrible day is coming, and then for that day to have no bearing on how you're living your life now. Instead, knowing that that day is coming, the thing to do is to plan and to prepare, because next to that day, nothing else in life matters. Along that same line, think about what Moses wrote in Psalm 90 and verse 12. Moses wrote in Psalm 90 and verse 12, "So teach us to number our days." Why, Moses? That we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Hear me when I say this. Your days on earth are numbered, and so are mine. And since we know this is true, wisdom demands that we plan our lives accordingly. And that's especially true for anyone here today who has not obeyed the gospel of Christ. If that describes you, you are playing a dangerous game with your soul. You have not prepared and planned for eternity. And so whether we're dealing with the day-to-day events of life or the big eternal perspective of things, wise people plan. But in the second place, not only should we make plans, but when we plan, we should do so confidently. If you are a child of God, you should have the greatest possible confidence as you look forward in life. Let me remind you of another text found here in the book of Proverbs. Go to chapter 3 with me. Proverbs chapter 3. In Proverbs 3 in verses 5 and 6, a text with which I hope you are already familiar, the wise man would write, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." Yes, God directs our paths through his word. That's how we most often apply this text. But it's just as true that God directs our paths through this life by means of his providential care as well. And I don't think we talk about that nearly enough. Remember, we're to trust the Lord in all of our ways, and that includes in our plan making as well. And so the core of our trust in God is our willingness to put our confidence in him. Too often I hear Christians fret as though they believe there is no God, or that if there is a God, that he's too aloof and too disinterested to do anything to help us. Hogwash. Let me remind you, there is a God in heaven. He is good to all men, and he is especially good to those who are his children. And so Christians should be confident about the future, not because we know what's going to happen, not because we have the power to bring every detail and plan in our lives to fruition, but because we acknowledge him in our ways, and we are confident and sure that he is in control. Let me say it another way. As Christians, we do not plan because we fear the future. We don't plan and plot and stockpile goods because we think that we're in this thing alone, and if we're not looking out for our own best interests, there's nobody else who will. Rather, we plan in confidence because we do believe in God, and we do trust in God, because we acknowledge him in all our ways, and because we do trust in his providential care for our lives. I'm sure many of you know Romans 8:28 by heart. In Romans 8 and verse 28, Paul says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose." While that passage does not assure us that we'll get everything we want in life, nor does it promise that everything that happens to us in life will be good, it does assure us that God's providence is working on our behalf, and that when you take the sum total of a faithful Christian's life, that God is able to work through all things to our ultimate good in the end. Therefore, when life throws an unexpected detour in our way, this should not cause us to unravel and to be derailed. Instead, we should continue to trust that the providential care of God is still at work in our lives. So, with God's providential care in mind, it should give us all the more reason to plan and to do so confidently. Not because we don't trust in God, but because we do. We should plan because we trust in him and because we know that his providential care in our lives is working in all matters, both physical and spiritual, for our ultimate good. And so that encourages me, not just to plan, but to plan with confidence. And my confidence is not in my ability to make things happen, but in his. And so as Christians, we should have a robust confidence in the future, because God is able to work all things out for our good in the end. And knowing that gives me confidence, so that when I plan, I can rest assured that the goodness of God is at work in my life too. But it also assures me that everything will be all right in the end when my plans fail. And so whether my plans come to fruition or whether my plans fall apart around me, I can look forward to the future because God has it all under control and his providence is at work. That truth can see me through both the good times and the bad in life, come what may. But here's the hard part. Even when I do trust God, and even when I do acknowledge Him in all my ways, and I plan and prepare for the future with God and His will in mind, even still, my plans don't always work out the way I'd hoped. How do I respond to that? I'm sure you have dear friends and loved ones that you had planned to enjoy them in your life for many years to come, and yet death came and took them away. I'm sure you have planned to live prosperous, healthy lives, some of you, and yet accidents, disease, just the ravages of old age have taken your health away. You didn't plan for that. You didn't hope for that, and yet here you are. And I'm sure there are some of you who in the past had romantic interests, career opportunities, and you had all these things planned out. You knew what you hoped for, you knew what you desired, you had a plan in mind, and yet for one reason or another, your plan didn't work out. How do we respond when our plans fail? Well, let me remind you, when we plan, we need to plan dependently. You should certainly plan. And when you plan confidently, knowing that God's providence is at work in your life. But in the end, you should also plan dependently. Go back and open your Bibles to Proverbs 16 and verse 9, where we began this afternoon. Look again at Proverbs 16 and verse 9. Again, the wise man Solomon writes, "A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps." And commenting on Proverbs 16 and verse 9, I like what one commentator said. They wrote this: "Man preposes, but God disposes." We often look toward the future and we say, this is the plan that I have in mind. This is what I want. This is what I expect. And this is how I desire for things to play out. And yet as you go through life, you quickly realize that the things that we hope for don't always happen. The things that we wish maybe don't occur at all, or they don't occur when we want them or how we want them. Now, how do you respond to that? In your mind, you had this all worked out. You knew what was going to happen, and yet it didn't. Well, according to Proverbs 16 and verse 9, when it comes to the plans of life, we need to come to grips with the fact that our plans cannot guarantee the result. Let me repeat that for you. Our plans cannot guarantee the result. The faster we come to grips with that truth and factor it into our plan making, the happier and more content we'll be. The problem is we often place far too much confidence in ourselves, and we make our plans and we're nigh on certain that this is the way it has to be. But it's not always the case. Instead, our plans are subject to change. And because God is the sovereign of the universe, He reserves the prerogatives, as it were, to say yes or no to anything we propose to do. God, as the sovereign of the universe, has both the right to bless your plans and to aid them in coming to pass, but He also has the right to hinder your plans and to providentially give you something different. And so, stated differently, you must approach life this way. All your planning is provisional at best. So, when you make plans for the future, hold your plans, as it were, with an open palm. I'm afraid too often, when we make plans, we clench our fist and we hold on tight and we say to God, here's how it must be. It's not the case. When we make our plans, we hold them in an open palm, and we, as Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, say, thy will be done. The outworking of God's providence will always be better than anything you planned for in the first place. After all, who's omniscient, you or God? Well, it's God. Who has unlimited wisdom and foresight, you or God? Well, it's God. I only have so much power and so many resources to bring my will to pass. But His resources and His power, they are limitless. And so how foolish I am when I think I've got it all worked out and that it's got to be my way or the highway. And God's got to give me what I want, when I want it, how I want it. Instead, I must see myself for who I am. I must recognize God for who he is. And I must be grateful for whatever his providence provides. But I should also be grateful for whatever his providence withholds, no matter how painful in the moment that may be. Now, let me give you a couple other passages that highlight this idea of the fact that our plans are provisional at best. Look at Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 21. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 21. Proverbs 19 and verse 21 reads as follows. There are many devices. If you have a New King James Bible in your lap this afternoon, it'll say plans. There are many devices or plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. Let me remind you of something that I know you know, but I'm afraid we occasionally forget. Here it is. He's God, and we're not. Never forget that. Let me remind you of something. He's God, and we're not. And because of who God is, and because we are his creation, it should be a no-brainer that we should yield to his will, and that we should defer to him. And yet so often we don't. Too often we behave as though we are God, that our plan should rule over creation, and that all we need for God is a blank check to make it happen. Have you ever thought that way? Oh, that is dangerous. Instead, we should come to God with our hopes, our wishes, our aspirations, our plans. We present them to God in our prayers, and then we say, your will be done. Sometimes, though, we don't even take God into consideration making our plans at all. Go with me to James chapter 4. Here's an example of that. James chapter 4. If you want to see the provisional nature of our planning, as well as the supremacy of God's will in the circumstances of our lives, read with me James chapter 4, verses 13 through 15. James writes, Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. Notice, they had a plan. And not only did they have a plan, but they had an outcome already foreordained in mind as to how this was all going to play out. James goes on. He says, Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor, which appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. Now catch this. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we will do this or that. Notice here in James chapter 4 that there's no condemnation here against making plans. There's no condemnation here in hoping to travel and expecting to do business and hopefully even making a profit. That's not what's condemned. Where's the rub? It's verse 15. Well, there's nothing wrong with anything they planned for in verse 13 per se. James says, here's your problem. You left God out of your plans. For instead you ought to say, if the Lord will, we will do this or that. Just a moment ago, I talked about how we should make plans with an open hand, right? Allowing God's will to be done. Well, here, this is what James is condemning, where we have a closed fist, and we've made our plans, and we're sure that it's going to happen. James says in verse 15, we should say if the Lord wills. Now, of course, this is not a verbal formula that we must repeat every time we make a plan. But rather, it goes to the heart by which we make our plans. If the Lord wills, that's what matters. Brothers and sisters in Christ, as you plan your day, as you plan your life, as you plan for the future of your children and your grandchildren, you must be conscious of the divine providence when you plan. This is so important because sometimes the unexpected happens. Sometimes the plans that we've made for our lives do not happen the way we had anticipated. Yes, God God blesses prudent planning, but remember, your plans do not bring God into obligation before you. God is not a genie in a bottle waiting to bless you with anything and everything you desire. But yet so often, we treat God that way. Sometimes we think too much of ourselves and our plans. Or we think too little about God's sovereignty and his power to providentially accomplish his will. And so when things in life don't go the way I had expected it, I doubt God. I doubt his existence. I doubt his goodness. Where was God? What a grave mistake. When we think about how we react when our plans fail, it all boils down to our trust in God. And I'm afraid too often our trust in God is misguided. I'm afraid too often our trust in God is based upon our terms. Have you ever heard a person say, I was trusting in God to do X, Y, and Z for me, and he didn't do it. I don't know if I can trust him anymore. The problem at the core of that kind of thinking is that when we speak that way, it shows we're trusting God for all the wrong things. Trusting in God does not mean trusting that he'll make your plans come to pass. The Bible nowhere tells us to expect that. Rather, when we plan according to God's will, praying that his will would be done, and then we trust. We trust in his character. We trust in his goodness. We trust in his wisdom. We trust that God always does what is right and good and best, and that no matter whatever comes to pass, God is working out what is best for me. So, when a loved one grows ill and dies, when financial reversals take place, when relationships fail, when offices close and factories shut down, when fires and floods destroy, please understand that these things do not affect our trust in God. Rather, you trust God because of his goodness and his character, not because you expect him to give you everything you desire. This idea that I trust God through both the ups and the downs of life, it is so incredibly liberating. Because when you trust God from the root of your heart in confidence in the eternal character of God, not in the mere outward circumstances of life, you can rest assured that everything will be all right. Even when your plans don't come to pass, you know it will all work out in the end. So, Christian, instead of being self-reliant, instead of believing that life must go the way that you've planned it if it's going to turn out right at all, instead, trust God. Rely upon God. And when your plans change, and invariably they will, learn to embrace that change and recognize it as the providential working of God. For some of you, God has given you just about everything you could have planned for in life and more. We all recognize in that the power behind our success is not in our planning, but rather in what God provides, right? But the challenge then is for you to give God glory in the fact that your plans worked out. We thank God for where we are in life, and we do not attribute our success to ourselves, but rather to his strength and to his wisdom. Let me tell you, that's the easy part. Here's the hard part. For some of you, God has not given you everything you've planned for or hoped for in life. For some of you, and perhaps for many of you, your life has been a long string of disappointments, one after another. For some of you, you wake up in the morning and you look at your life as it is, and you say to God, this is not what I wanted. When you find yourself in that spot, it is with equal humility that you must say, I am going to receive the present circumstances of life with grace, and I will continue to trust in God's perfect character no matter what. Please hear me when I say this. I know it's hard sometimes, but know this. What God withholds is just as much an expression of his love, his mercy, and his grace as it is what he gives. And so accept your lot in life, for better or worse, trusting that in the end, when you're standing in heaven someday, all things have worked together for good. That's our confidence. When your plans don't work out the way you hoped, and providence intervenes, and life works out in a much different way than you had ever anticipated, know this: it is not a sign that God's not there, and it's not a sign that things have gone wrong. The fact that you had one idea for how your life would go, and circumstances and providence have given you a different life entirely, that's not a sign that God has failed you. That is a sign that God's providence is at work in ways that you do not yet understand. You do not have to relive and rehearse the failures of your past over and over again. Rather, you can turn those things over to God and trust in his providential care to see you through. So let me challenge you with something as I close. I challenge you to learn to love and trust God more than you love and trust your plans. By that I mean you must learn to be content in Christ, even when life doesn't play out as you hoped. Or to say it another way, you must pursue the life that God has actually given you more than the life you wish you had. Is that an easy pill to swallow? No, but it's good medicine all the same. So let me remind you, this is God's universe. He created it, he ordered it, he fashioned it, and he does not have to check in with us as to how he runs it. Instead, it is our duty to trust and obey. So the next time you make plans, and those plans don't work out the way you hoped, instead of growing bitter at life, instead of becoming angry with God, instead of beating yourself up, instead of seeing every unexpected change in life as the means of God's grace, and rest assured that in the end, whether life gives you that which you desired or not, all things work together for good to those who love God and to them who are called according to his purpose.